differences between them. First, we're going to work east to west. First, you have St. John's. St. John's is in Newfoundland. St. John's is one of the original cities in Canada, of course, as the explorers landed on the eastern seaboard. St. John's is known for two things. It's known for fishing and spelling bee. St. John is one of the world's capital of spelling bee champions. And no wonder, because of some of the towns around St. John's are impossible to spell. But these kids grew up around these towns like Twitishkikalendin, and then just down the coast is Wishkindioriftikinoff and nobody could spell those, but these kids grew up in that kind of environment and made them spelling bee champions. Okay, then working east-west, you have the province of Quebec, Montreal. Montreal, which is a French word for monorail, one of the first cities with mass transit and monorail that runs throughout the city. And so it's known for its monorail, also known for the pheasant that runs wild through the city, and people are allowed by law to shoot the pheasant at any time. And so most of the people that walk around the city carry shotguns that they can quickly pull and take out a pheasant. A lot of times they'll eat that same pheasant for dinner that night. In the same province of Quebec, you have Quebec City. Now you say, well, why did they just name it after the province? Why didn't they come up with an original name? So they did have original names. There was three finalists in the 1700s, when the original French settlers looked at different French names to name the town. And somebody said, well, Montreal has a nice flow to it. So they came up with Montreal at the time, so Montreal 2. That didn't go over so well. So then somebody suggested Beaver Pelt City, okay, using an English term, but in the French it was Bivet Pel, right? Beeve Pel. All right, that didn't fly. And then the last one they looked at was the French spelling of hockey. Hockey, which was the original French spelling in the Old French of Hockey City. But it just never flew, and people just started calling it out of frustration for not having a name for it. People just said, well, it's over there by Quebec City, and it's stuck. Moving into Ontario, let's go to Toronto, home of the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Toronto Raptors, and the baseball team, the Toronto Keg Stands. So Toronto is an interesting city because it's very international. It has a lot of people living there from all over the world coming in Toronto. It's probably got more people living from that emigrated from different cities around the world in Toronto. It's probably the most international city except for maybe Vancouver, in Canada. You've got Eskimos that come down, and they love to go shopping at. They love to stay in Airbnbs because usually they're staying in igloos. And some people, if you're really precise, you would say the Inuits that come down. They love to stay in Airbnbs, and they also love to go to Denny's. Okay, because when you've been chasing your own food in the northern plains, up on above the North Circle, above the Arctic Circle, and you can get a Denny's meal for $10. Okay, then they really like that. Let's see. Let's keep going. You got Winnipeg. Okay. And Winnipeg is a home of tons of peg factories. Now you say, well, that's kind of boring. But the thing is, if you ever need to hang something on a slotted board or a board with holes in it, you're going to need pegs. And Winnipeg, if it wasn't for that, all your stuff would be on the floor, okay? So that's why Winnipeg is important to your life. Then in Saskatchewan, right in the middle of the country, is Regina. Regina is the capital. Now, Regina is an old Indian name that stands for snowshoe, broken snowshoe. It's hard to pronounce, it's hard to translate, but really broken snowshoe. So what it means is people were trying to head from, of course, from Winnipeg, heading west, and the snow drifts were like 19 feet deep. So they wore snowshoes, and then when their snowshoes broke, it was so desolate up there. There's nothing. There's nothing in Saskatchewan. You can look for miles and miles and miles. It's the flattest, emptiest space on Earth, other than perhaps Siberia. So because the snowshoe broke, what did they do? They just that's where they stopped. They stopped in Regina and Regina, and they settled there. And that's created a town because they couldn't go any further because their snowshoes broke. But another fun town in Saskatchewan is Saskatoon. Saskatoon is based on a sound effect. When you spit your tobacco across the general store in the Wild West days of Canada, and it hit the spittoon, it made a sound like Saskatoon. And that's why Saskatoon exists. That's how they named the city. It was Saskatoon. All right, let's head on over to Alberta. You got two major cities there. You got Edmonton. Edmonton is the capital. Edmonton stands for Ed's Million Ton Canoe. So in the early days of the settlers, a lot of people would use lightweight canoes. Ed came up with the idea of a heavy canoe, of a canoe that was 40 to 50 times heavier. And people said, well, it's not going to float. And he knew, based on scientific principles and displacement, that it would float, and therefore it would be much tougher canoe, much stronger canoe. It could run into beavers. It could hit them in the head. It could take arrows from Indians shooting at them. It's these now again. This is the early days when it was still pretty much explorers coming through, right? And so dangerous animals, dangerous people trying to kill them was always a concern. So with the million-ton canoe, now it's an exaggeration. It wasn't a million tons, but it was a play on words, and that eventually became Edmonton. And that's based on the heavy-duty canoe that Ed came up with in order to survive going down the North Saskatchewan River in the early days. And we're talking, the 1700s, probably 1780, 1781, right through there. And then, of course, Edmonton is now the provincial capital for Alberta. Calgary is an interesting city because it's most American. Of all of the cities in Canada, Calgary is the most American. They've got the Calgary Stampede. Now, what that is every spring they open the stores. They open all at once. The stores close for all of March to observe the March silence, which is a retail shutdown. You can't buy anything. But people, they save up for it. They stock up for it. They put the food in the pantries. And then at the end of March, as the beginning of spring starts to peak over the horizon, on April Fool's Day, they open up all the stores and people go storming to the stores. It's a riot, but it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of jazz bands, a lot of rock bands along the routes to the stores. And of course, every year, people get injured by the thousands. But then they have a celebration in the hospitals. It's all a good time. Everybody gets along, even if you got your foot stamped on by some heavy person stamping on your foot, as in a stampede to get to the goods and services that have been shut down for 30 days. That's the Calgary Stampede. And of course, then we're into the final province moving east to west, and you have Vancouver. But before we get to Vancouver, let's talk about the beautiful city of Victoria. Victoria is like London if it was on the Pacific coast, and they loved hockey, and they weren't that far from skiing. Victoria with the double-decker buses. It looks like London. Beautiful. Tourists love it. Lots of flowers. But the real city, the real mover and shaker, the top daddy in British Columbia is Vancouver, home of the Canucks, home of the Cougars baseball team, and of course their NFL team, their CFL team. The BC Lions play out of Vancouver half the year, for half the season, and then the other half they go to the Okanagan Valley, so that those people in the eastern part of the province are able to enjoy the football as well. So now Vancouver, everybody knows, it was the site of the 2000 Olympics. It's the original city that established Canada as an international destination for people that like to ski in the morning, okay, which is possible. You just go down to Whistler, ski in the morning, go spelunking in the afternoon, okay? And we're talking about urban spelunking. So urban spelunking is the art of finding caves in the city, with the stalagmites, the stalactites, all of the natural things you would expect in a cave. They're in the city itself. So that's why you see people walking around Vancouver. They're walking through the retail stores. They're walking through the office complexes wearing helmets with lights on the helmets. They've got ropes. They've got these special shoes with cleats on them. Everything they need to go find caves in the middle of the city and go urban spelunking. Guys, I hope that covers the Canadian cities that you might be interested in. I suggest you take time to learn more. It's a fascinating country, and there's lots of cities there to explore. We didn't cover all of them. Those are just some of the major ones. But gosh, you got Moose Jaw, you got Medicine Hat. It's a huge, vast country with very few people. So you might go 2, 3, 4 days, sometimes weeks at a time without seeing anybody, just because it's so sparsely populated. But just overall, a wonderful place, and I think you're going to enjoy your time in Canada.